Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, welcome. Welcome, dear guests, dear panelist members, and our esteemed students. So let's start our conference. Welcome to Almaty. Welcome to our conference on Central Asian regionalism in the Vertex of EU, Russia, and China. So I am Assylzat Karabayeva and assistant professor at the Department of Political Science and International Relations here at KIMEP University. And yeah, today we're going to discuss. So we are planned in the conference for 2 days, and today we're going to have expert panel sessions, and tomorrow we're going to have the paper sessions. And in these 2 days, we're going to discuss the Central Asian regionalism and also the impact of big powers, great powers, in making or like enabling or constraining the region building process in Central Asia. So what kind of opportunities and the challenges we have regarding region building process in Central Asia, like from different perspectives, from political, geopolitical, and economic perspectives, will be discussed and explored in this 2 days event. Welcome. And yeah, so I think we will start the first session, and the first session will be on navigating power dynamics in Central Asia's political and geopolitical landscape. And in this session, we have very much excited and very much interesting experts in this topic. We have 5 important panelist members. So let me introduce them. So first we have Xiaotong Zhang. He is the professor at KIMEP University, Department of Political Science and International Relations. And he's also academic director of China and the Central Asian Studies Center. He also serves as the editor-in-chief of Economic Diplomacy. He has different kind of important publications in peer-reviewed international journals. He's also author of many books, monographs, and including China's Modern Economic Statecraft, A Wealth Power Dialect, New Economic Statecraft, China, the USA, and the EU, Linkage Power Europe, the EU's trade negotiations with China. We also have Dr. Wang. He is the professor and the executive director of the Center for Studies on Central Asia and the Caspian Rim, Xi'an International Studies University. He received his PhD from Fudan University in 2010. He is the expert on comparative regionalism, and he has also different publications in the various peer-reviewed journals, including World Social Science, Northeast Asia Forum, and International Forum. And his monograph, the recent monograph, is on institutions and norms, compared perspectives on regional integration in Central Asia. Our next speaker, the panelist member, is Gülperi Güngör, and she is an analyst at the Center for Eurasian Studies, an Ankara-based think tank. She is currently a PhD candidate in the International Relations Department at Ankara University. Since joining the Center for Eurasian Studies in January 22, her research has concentrated on Central Asia with particular focus on the region's integration and the regionalization dynamics and the development of infrastructure projects across Eurasia. Our next panelist is the Dr. Aizada Nuriddenova, and she is an assistant professor at the Social Science Department at SDU University in Kazakhstan. She holds master's degree and a PhD degree in international relations, specializing in China's foreign policy from School of International and Public Affairs at Galym University in China. Her research interests are centered on Chinese foreign policy and regionalism in Central Asia, with a particular focus on China's Central Asian engagement, consultative meetings in the Central Asian region, and the foreign policy of Kazakhstan. The last but not least, our panelist member is Dr. Galym Zhusipbek. He is an associate professor at the Department of Social Sciences at the University in Kazakhstan. He holds a PhD from Ankara University's Faculty of Political Science. His PhD dissertation focused on critical theories, neo-Gramscian approach, European Eurasian security, and Orientalism. His research interests include critical theories, critical realism, theoretical foundations of human rights, inclusive development, ideational trends in Muslim world, women's rights, children's rights, and the decolonial approach. And I'm also very much excited to introduce you our discussant, Maryia, Dr. Maryia Danilovich. We are very much welcome you. Happy to have you here. And Maryia would act as a discussant for our panel session. And Maryia, she is the sinologist and the IR scholar based at Center for Modern East Asian Studies, University of Göttingen, Germany. And she's also affiliated as a researcher at the International Institute for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Uppsala University. Her research projects examine China's involvement in foreign policy towards both Central Asia and Eastern Europe. Maryia completed her PhD in 2015 with a fieldwork-based thesis on China's policy in Central Asia. So as you see, we have very much valuable and experts in the regionalism and also about the research done on the role of great powers, how they have roles in shaping the region building process in Central Asia. So before we start our panel session, so I'd like to mention about the requirements of the session. So each panelist will be given around 30 minutes for the presentation. So after having all the presentations, we will move towards the discussion session where Maryia would comment and perhaps ask some questions from the panelists. After the discussion session, we'll open the floor for the Q&A session. And we'll invite our guests as well as students, audience to bring interesting questions for the panelist members. So, yeah, let's start our panel session on navigating power dynamics in Central Asia's political and the geopolitical landscape. And our first speaker is Professor Xiaotong Zhang, and his topic of the presentation is Remembering Mario Tello, What I Learned from Mario When Reflecting on Central Asian Regionalism. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Indeed, Mario Tello, he was my professor, supervised my PhD thesis. His major research area is regionalism. I have to confess that when I was his student, I didn't really learn a lot from him about regionalism. I learned a lot from him about what kind of power European Union is. European Union is a civilian power. So for let's see, yeah, Mario. Right, the next one, please. Okay, so Mario, his a lot of books has huge inspirations for me, like this one, Europe, a civilian power. So I learned a lot about what kind of power European is, and also I learned a lot from him about international relations, a European perspective, and also other areas. And today's event do give me an opportunity to revisit Mario Tello, because Mario Tello is one of the leading experts in the world on regionalism. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about regionalism, interregionalism, multilateralism, and slightly about Central Asia. For me, I'm not really an expert in regionalism. I'm a good student. I want to learn. I want to learn from you, from people like Professor Wang, who is a top Chinese expert on comparative regionalism. I want to learn from Assylzat, who is a leading Kazakhstani expert on Central Asia regionalism, and also from all of you. And also again, my commemoration of Mario Tello, who sadly passed away last year. So firstly, regionalism and a new regionalism. So Mario Tello, he published a book called the European Union and the New Regionalism. We know that European Union is a leading region, right? The most advanced region of regional integration. So Mario Tello, he focused a lot about what kind of a power the European Union is, right? The European Union is not a very big military power. It is more civilian power, right? And the European Union is a big experiment of regionalism. The European Union's regionalism is different from old-typed regionalism. European Union regionalism is more transnational, multi-layered, involving a lot of actors, including epistemic community, including companies, right? And this book is really a must-read book for understanding new regionalism. I still remember when Mario Tello talked about this book, his face was shining. So I said to myself, I really hope that one day I can tell my professor that I published a paper on regionalism, I wrote a book on regionalism, but it's too late, right? I put in the preface of my newly published book called A Linkage Power Europe in memory of Mario Tello. So I think I owe him a lot. He always encouraged me to publish my PhD thesis as soon as possible, but I always distracted by writing novel-styled books or papers. He said, Xiaotong, why didn't you publish your book as soon as possible? Then the moment when I published my book, my PhD thesis, Linkage Power Europe, Mario Tello has already died. So, but I managed to put in the preface of my book in commemoration, in memory of my professor, Mario Tello. So for Mario Tello, regionalism refers to the general phenomenon where state and non-state actors cooperate and coordinate strategies within a particular region. And regionalism can serve as a unique type of a world order. So for Mario Tello, regionalism is not just strategies. It is a reflection of a unique type of a world order. So that promotes regionalism to a very high level. And also for Mario Tello, regionalism is usually associated with a formal program and often leads to institution building. For Mario Tello, he sees European Union as a type of new regionalism. And he differentiates new regionalism from old regionalism. So he said, unlike old regionalism, which was dominated by states and intergovernmental organizations, new regionalism involves a variety of actors, including states, markets, civil society, and external actors. It addresses cooperation on multiple fronts simultaneously with strong sectoral linkages. So Mario not only theorizes European Union as a new regionalism, but also he very much focuses on the EU's diplomacy in the form of something called inter-regionalism. An idea originates from new regionalism. Yeah, inter-regionalism. So from the same book, European Union and New Regionalism, the second edition. So inter-regionalism, as the name suggests, is about region-to-region relationship, right? So inter-regionalism for him is a concept in international relations that refers to formalized relationships between regions, often involving structured dialogues and cooperation agreements. So that is why I'm very interested in understanding EU, Central Asia, inter-regionalism, right? We all know next year in Samarkand, there will be the EU Central Asia Summit. I think it's going to be the third or the fourth. I think it's maybe the third EU Central Asia Summit. So that is a typical expression of interregionalism. And I asked Mario, I said, many years ago, I said, is that interregionalism necessarily referring to two regions? Is it possible interregionalism can also cover great power relationship with a specific region, like Latin America, like Central Asia, or like Southeast Asia, ASEAN? He said, it's a good point. Actually, he said, China's institutionalized dialogue or summit with ASEAN, according to him, is a special kind of interregionalism. I think in one of his books, he says, interregionalism could be hybrid. So not just region to region, let's say Central Asia to European Union, or Central Asia, or European Union to ASEAN, right? Southeast Asia Regional Organization. It could also refer to one great power or a major economy vis-a-vis a specific region, like C5+1, like the United States vis-a-vis Central Asia, or China vis-a-vis ASEAN, right? So-called 10+1. He said it's a special kind of interregionalism. And European Union pioneers in negotiating institutionalized frameworks with other regions. So this morning when I watched news, I saw some French agriculture people, farmers, they demonstrated, they blocked the streets in Hongpu and Schuman, protesting the free trade agreement between European Union and the Mercosur, right? That's a few South American countries who have already finished negotiating with on a free trade agreement, but it has not yet been ratified. So you see some French farmers protested against the imports from Mercosur to European Union. But this European Union Mercosur free trade agreement is a typical interregionalism. Because, so what is definition of interregionalism? Interregionalism involves formal relations between regions as judicial or quasi-judicial entities. So it signifies a post-Westphalian era where regions gain activeness by modulating national sovereignties. Because we all know for the Westphalia system, which starts from the 17th century, so the nation states, the sovereignties is the major international actor, not regions, right? So European Union or attention with Central Asia as a regional entity, I see a question mark whether they can gain a full international activeness. I remember Maryia told me, he said, I said to him, oh, European Union is a super trading power. So no problem, Europe is is definitely a great power. And he said, no, not yet. European Union is only an international actor. So it needs to move from the actorness to be a power, but not a traditional power like China or like the United States. The European Union is a civilian power, right? It's a sui generis, special type of power. So that really requires a lot of scholarship to really understand what is actorness of regions. So our question for the Central Asia region integration is, to what extent Central Asia has already gained international actorness? To what extent Central Asia can serve as a coherent international actor, right? So I think it's a very interesting research question. I guess for the remaining 2 days, we'll talk about that. And also interregionalism is a very important component of the EU's actorness and the EU's diplomacy. So the European Union, they're practicing interregionalism. It is a central actor in promoting interregionalism. It has established numerous interregional partnerships with regions like African Union, ASEAN, Mercosur. So remember last week when the EU ambassador Alaska came, she emphasized a lot about the EU Central Asia Summit, but she also emphasized the EU Central Asia institutional framework. I think that's an expression of interregionalism. So my question is whether in the future the EU and the Central Asia will sign an interregional agreement. Because for the moment, the EU's approach to Central Asian countries is hybrid. It is both interregional, like Samarkand EU Central Asia Summit, but also bilateral. So the EU has signed the so-called enhanced partnership and cooperation agreement with Kazakhstan and approaching signing with the so-called EPC with Uzbekistan and also Kyrgyzstan, but not with Turkmenistan yet. Turkmenistan is still a PCA, partnership and cooperation agreement. Next slide. Multilateralism. So the last book of Maryia is Multilateralism, Past, Present, and the Future. Regionalism is the expression of multilateralism, right? It requires at least 3 actors or more states based on generalized principles of conduct. So now indeed for regionalism, for multilateralism, it's indeed a very difficult moment. Next slide. Yep. So in 2018, my professor Maryia wrote a book called Regionalism in Hard Times, last minute. So he already sensed back in 2018, regionalism is going through hard times. Why? Because global financial crisis, because of multipolar power politics, because of Donald Trump. For God's sake, he came back again. He's going to stir up the whole world, right? But as our colleague from IMEP just mentioned, his come back might create double-edged, two sides of effects, positive and negative. The positive side is that every region might feel more urgency to strengthen regional collaboration. And I wish good luck to regional integration for Central Asia. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Zhang. And our next speaker is Dr. Wang, and he'll be talking on comparative regionalism and the new trends of regional integration in Central Asia. The floor is yours.
My presentation is titled Comparative Regionalism and New Trends of Regional Integration in Central Asia. I think there are 2 main reasons for discussing this topic. First, regionalism has evolved from old regionalism and new regionalism, just Professor Zhang talked about, to comparative regionalism. Comparative regionalism refers to the analysis of regionalism from a global perspective that transcends Western regionalism, especially European Union's model, treating Europe and other regions of the world equally. Secondly, I want to talk about this topic is that there are new trends in Central Asia regionalism, particularly since the Central Asia Leaders Summit in 2018. I think which has injected new momentum into regional integration. Does not work? Okay. My presentation will divided into 5 parts. The first part will discuss my research questions, and the second part is a very brief literary review about Central Asia regionalism studies. The third and the fourth are the core of my presentation. Analyze Central Asia regionalism from the perspective of Global South regionalism. And finally, I will give a very brief conclusion. So I will talk about my research question. Central Asian regionalism emerged in 1994 with the establishment of the Central Asia Economic Union, which was renamed the Central Asia Economic Cooperation in 1998, and again renamed the Central Asia Cooperation Organization in 2002. With Russia's join to the Central Asian Cooperation Organization in 2004, it integrated into the Eurasian Economic Community. Simultaneously, in this new century, various regional institutions and organizations established by major external powers, such as Turkey, China, and EU, has built a lot of regional organizations such as SCO, EAEO, CSTO, and C5+1. So Central Asia region presents a contradictory state. On one hand, there's a lack of regionalism as the Central Asia countries do not have a self-led regional organization. While on the other hand, there exists overlapping and competing regional institutions. Since 2018, the summits of Central Asia leaders have urged in new developmental opportunities for Central Asia regionalism. So my questions are, how can we understand the development of Central Asia regionalism, and why does Central Asia regionalism present a contradictory state? On the one hand, there are lots of regional organizations, and on the other hand, there's no institutions built by Central Asia countries. Next page. There are three ways to start Central Asia regionalism. First, it examines Central Asia as a sub-region of Eurasia, where it is reasonable to integrate Central Asia regionalism research into the broader content of Eurasian regionalism. But this approach tends to regard Central Asia as a subordinate, which is not conducive to a comprehensive understanding of Central Asia regionalism. Second, there are a lot of research about specific Eurasian organizations, such as SCO, EAEO, CSTO. Although these discussions involve the Central Asia countries, only one or two Central Asia countries joined these regional institutions. For example, Kazakhstan and Tajikistan joined the EAEO. Third, analysis of Central Asia regionalism from geopolitical and functionalism perspectives are helpful. However, as a member of Global South countries, Central Asia regionalism persists distinct characters that must not be overlooked, and their different logic comparing to EU. So we will to explore. I will study Global South regionalism and compare it to EU's model to understand the Central Asia regionalism. I think there are 3 points. The first, Global South regionalism is significantly influenced by regional and external powers. Global South countries, often small states, are susceptible to control by both regional and external powers. When the regional power structure is unipolar, there is limited space for the development of regionalism. Conversely, when the regional power structure is multipolar, there is some room for regionalism to develop. Additionally, the competition for leadership among regional states affects the provision of public goods and can also constrain regionalism if we regard regionalism as public goods. And I think secondly, global South regionalism is primarily driven by regional governance, with political and security issues often taking precedence over economic issues. Given that global South countries are economically dependent on major powers, the motivation for economic integration is weak, where political and security motivations are more pronounced. Third, state building and region building are features of global South regionalism, in contrast to Western regionalism, particularly in Europe model, which primarily employs regional building through the establishment of supranational institutions to achieve regional integration, avoiding to break a war. Global South countries have recently gained independence, prioritize national sovereignty, with regionalism serve as a primary means to state building. Furthermore, even when global South countries have intentions for regional building, still national institutions are not the primary means. Instead, regional identity and regional norms play more significant role in it. For example, ASEAN, the main point of the ASEAN is regional identity, not its regional institutions. So this is the framework to underline, to understanding global South regionalism. Now we'll talk about Central Asia's regionalist development. Central Asia regionalism has undergone three developmental stages: emergency, decline, and resurgence. First, in the 1990s, Central Asian countries initiated the process of regional integration by establishing regional organizations. However, as this organization was absorbed into Russian-led regional organization, Central Asian regionalization faced setbacks. Second, in the new century, with Russia put more on Eurasian region, it led the establishment of numerous regional organizations, resulting in overlapping regionalism among other regional powers. Third, following the 2018 Summit of Central Asia leaders, a new process of regional integration was initiated. So how can we understand this development? Next page. The perspective of global South regionalism is helpful in understanding the development of Central Asia regionalism. First, in the 1990s, Russia's lack of attention to Central Asia provided space for regional integration among Central Asian countries, which at outset of their dependence promoted economic development with a focus on state building. Second, as the new century progressed, Russia, as the dominant regional power, began to emphasize Central Asia, thereby constraining the space for regionalism among Central Asian countries. Currently, the damage of regional security dynamics made security a primary driving force for regionalism, where Central Asian countries continue to view state building as their main objectives, with a weak sense of regional building. Third, after 2018, with the diminished influence of Russia and the changed relations between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, new opportunities emerged for Central Asia regionalism. As external powers began to pay more attention to Central Asia, connectivity within the region became a primary driving force for regional integration. Against this background of conflict in Eurasia, the regional consciousness of Central Asia countries have increased. Mixed state and regional building significance objectives. At last, I will give a brief conclusion of my presentation. The Global South perspective is helpful in understanding the evolution of Central Asia regionalism and its latest developments. On one hand, Central Asia regional integration is still in progress. On the other hand, Central Asia regionalism serves as a pertinent case to illustrate the patterns of regional South, the pattern of Global South regionalism. That's all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wang. So let's move to our next speaker, Gülperi Güngör, and she'll be talking on the organization of Turkic states in Central Asia's regional integration, opportunities, and geopolitical challenges.
Dear colleagues, esteemed panelists and guests, good morning to you all. And I'm very happy to be here in Almaty and honored for the opportunity to contribute this panel. In this panel, we are discussing the power dynamics in Central Asia's political and geopolitical landscape. We can say that Turkey has been a notable actor in power dynamics of the region since the 90s. From Turkic-speaking state summits to organization of Turkic states, Turkey has actively engaged with Central Asia and the Caucasus. In my presentation, I will address the impact of OTS on Central Asia's regional integration and the geopolitics of the region. Let me start with a brief historical background. Next slide, please. The 90s were a period of optimism for Turkey for the cooperation in the region, with Turkey promoting itself as a model for these newly independent republics, emphasizing shared language, culture, and historical ties. Beginning in 1992, Turkic-speaking countries' heads of state summits were organized. However, progress in the summits faced setbacks due to the regional issues and the internal state building challenges. In the early 2000s, Turkey's policy in the region shifted to a more pragmatic approach, institutionalized approach. This was marked by 2009 establishment of Turkic Council through the Nahchivan Agreement. The organization was renamed Organization of Turkic States in 2021, a name suggested by Nazarbayev. The institutionalization of OTS reflects Turkey's pragmatic approach, but also reflects a broader approach of new regionalism. Next slide, please. New regionalism emerged in international area. Professor Xiaotong already mentioned about it. Unlike realist hard power-driven regionalism of cold power, this new regionalism is grounded in constructivist principles. As you can see on the table, it reflects the mentality of multipolar world system. We can say that cooperation under the OTS umbrella has reached what Bjorn Hetne calls the level of regional community. Next slide, please. This stage refers to a deepening of social communication, convergence in values and actions, and the transformation of the region into an active, institutionalized entity. I want to mention here that the word Turkic here can sometimes be interpreted too broadly and can be misunderstood sometimes unfairly. Especially recently, there have been some accusations of pan-Turkism and Turanism in some writings. I mentioned that the summits were gathered under the name of Turkic-speaking countries. Here's, of course, there is an emphasis on shared heritage stemming from the unity of language, culture, and history, while the concept of Turkic would expressed by OTS emphasized a spiritual element. we mostly see that organization pursue a pragmatic purpose. Next slide, please. A pragmatic purpose developed cooperation mechanisms in many areas, such as trade and energy. The pragmatic approach is rooted in regional realities. Following the Soviet Union's collapse, the newly independent Central Asian countries sought to develop alternative infrastructures to integrate their economics into the regional networks. Infrastructural limitations of these landlocked states have also posed challenges for Turkey's economic involvement in the region. One of the primary initiatives that Turkey supports under the OTS is the Trans-Caspian International East-West Middle Corridor, connecting China to Europe via Central Asia and Turkey. This corridor aligns with Turkey's desire to play a role as a bridge between East and West. After the Russia-Ukraine war started, the necessity of alternative routes also came to the fore. Significant infrastructure projects have supported this corridor's development. The Baku-Tbilisi-Kars Railway, Marmara Tunnel, enables rail transit from Asia to Europe. Turkey's cooperation with China's Belt and Road Initiative also complements OTS connectivity goals. In 2015, Turkey signed a memorandum to align BRI with Middle Corridor. Aligned with economic objectives, the OTS has established working groups on investment, economic diversification, and entrepreneurship. Regular meetings of economy ministers and forums encourage economic collaboration among member states. While OTS has set important goals and made progress, its mission is not without obstacles. Next slide, please. Geopolitical tensions and conflicting interests complicate the organization's integration efforts. For example, Armenia remains largely isolated in the region due to the historical conflicts and estranged relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan. Despite proposals such as Zangezur Corridor or Crossroads of Peace, internal and external factors continue to hinder Armenia's connectivity to Caucasus, Central Asia, and Turkey. Iran presents another challenge. Tehran views OTS regional integration efforts with skepticism, viewing them as potentially irredentist. Iran's concerns about Trans-Caspian corridor and the possibility of gas pipeline reflects its strategic interest in maintaining its influence over regional transit routes. Another difficulty is prejudiced approach of the EU. In fact, the EU did not develop a comprehensive policy towards Central Asia until 2007. The development of this policy was actually the result of EU's growing strategic interest in the region. Germany was the president of the Union in 2007 and identified Central Asia as one of its policy priorities. Due to the possible difficulties in Russia's energy supply also. In 2014, the EU increased funding for Central Asia and formulated another strategy in 2019. These were in response to Russia-Ukraine conflict and later China's growing influence in the region through the Belt and Road Initiative. Brussels proposed Europe-Asia connectivity strategy in 2018 and a second Central Asia strategy, as I mentioned, in 2019. Like the 2007 strategy, the 2019 strategy includes many unrealizable areas for cooperation, leaving the impression that implementation will be weak. The EU Central Asia policy suffers from the reactive process and failure resulting from EU's tendency to make unrealistic commitments. Next slide, please. In fact, within the OTS framework, there is a potential for cooperation with the EU, presenting mutual benefits. AVİM and Konrad Adenauer Foundation organized conferences series, EU-Turkey cooperation in Central Asia, with more policymakers and academics discussing collaboration in infrastructure, energy security. Turkey, a country in EU accession negotiations and part of the EU customs union, aligns with EU standards and can contribute to promote these standards in Central Asia as well. At this time, when discussions on EU strategic autonomy and US-China competition are on the global agenda, Turkey wants to contribute to integration of Central Asia and the Caucasus with pragmatic understanding and emphasize its role as a transit and a hub. It wants to emphasize its role as crossroads of both infrastructure investments and global value chains, connections between China and the EU. We can say that Turkey's aim here is contribute to the integration of Central Asia and Eurasia. Next slide, please. Many writings at AVİM have proposed the concept of constructivist Eurasianism, advocating regional cooperation over competition, cooperation over competition, and rejecting anti-Western sentiments of Eurasianism. The Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs addressed this under its Asia and EU policy. This term similarly avoids anti-Western positioning. Next slide, please. So the conclusion that the role of organizations of Turkic states, we can say that pursue a pragmatist approach for the connectivity of infrastructure and connecting global value chains, while developing cooperation, emphasizing common language, culture, and history is also on the agenda. We can say that this pragmatic approach is more evident. And integration of Central Asia and Eurasia can be served as a bridge between East and West, and enhancing regional cohesion and integration. Thank you.
Thank you, Gülperi. So yeah, let's move to our next panelist member, the Aizada Nuriddenova, and she will be discussing on the Ukraine war, domestic stability, and the Kazakhstan's equidistant diplomacy. The floor is yours.
Hello all. It's a great pleasure to be here. I would like to thank the organizers for arranging this great panel discussion. I would like to share some findings of my book chapter, which was published in an edited book, which in turn was edited by Dr. Assylzat Karabayeva and Zhang. And I want to focus on Kazakhstan's foreign policy since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Okay, so I would like to first focus on what the other researchers have said about Kazakhstan's foreign policy since the war in Ukraine. Firstly, there's this idea that Kazakhstan has been attempting to diminish its dependence on Russia, and Kazakhstan has been trying to expand its relations with other regional partners. There's another idea that Kazakhstan rediscovered its multi-vector foreign policy in a genuine way, and the previous multi-vector foreign policy was not used in its full potential before the war. And there's this another idea that Kazakhstan might be merely portraying the image of distancing itself from Russia, while keeping the previous approach. And finally, there is this double track approach, which says that Kazakhstan appears to show assertiveness towards Russia, while carefully abstaining from any confrontational moves towards Moscow. So my simple question is, how has the war in Ukraine changed or affected the foreign policy of Kazakhstan? And I argued that this particular event made Kazakhstan revise its foreign policy. Specifically, Kazakhstan has been conducting an equidistant diplomacy as part of a larger hedging strategy in relation to its foreign partners in order to maximize benefits and minimize any risks in the context of a treaty. Audience. The literature on audience cost is predominantly focused on the democratic states, and it says that the domestic audience, when leaders face international conflicts and if they don't keep their promises, the domestic audience tends to so-called punish the leaders in the next elections. And there's no much room about audience cost in authoritarian countries. But there's this recent literature which focuses on audience cost in authoritarian countries as well. So they argue that public opinion matters in authoritarian settings as well. However, in the literature, there's no consensus on how the domestic audience punishes the leader if there is a policy that the public doesn't like. So in this context, I focus on, or the small authoritarian countries try to appease domestic public. And at the same time, they try not to offend great powers. And that gives rise to equidistant diplomacy. A little bit of theory here. Equidistant diplomacy, according to Thiel and Koga, major theorizers of this concept, it's a diplomatic tactic aimed at signaling a neutral image of a country. So in practicing equidistant diplomacy, countries usually use three major tools, such as paralleling, downplaying, and broadcasting. And I would like to briefly define each one of these tools. Paralleling involves specific actions that are taken in relation to two or more great powers in order to create this impression that similar actions are being taken in relation to all the sides and no one side is excluded. Downplaying refers to diplomatic statements aimed at lessening the effects of an impression that the country is tilting towards one particular great power. Broadcasting is directed towards explicit expression of the state's adherence to an equidistant diplomacy by deliberately communicating to the both domestic and foreign audience of the country's neutral stance. So first, I would like to focus on the public opinion in Kazakhstan since the war in Ukraine. According to Demoscope survey, the percentage of the respondents who think that Russia is waging a war against Ukraine with the aim of its occupation and further annexation had been on the rise from roughly 13% to 28% by May 2023. And we can also observe that there's this reinvigoration of the debate on national identity, decolonization, the role of Kazakh language. And some analysts observed that Tokayev's statement at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum positively affected his approval rating, although there is no official presidential approval ratings in Kazakhstan. But according to Demoscope survey, the respondents said 75% of respondents in Kazakhstan liked their president in May 2023. So I would like to give some specific examples of each tool that Kazakhstan is using. One is paralleling. For instance, in December 2022, Tokayev traveled to St. Petersburg to participate at the meeting of the heads of the CIS states after having concluded a treaty on allied relations with Uzbekistan 4 days earlier. And in May 2023, Tokayev offered to host the 10th anniversary Eurasian Economic Union Summit in Astana after a week of after his visit to China, during which Kazakhstan and China concluded numerous economic deals. Kazakhstan also tries to downplay certain events in order to appease domestic public. For instance, before visiting the Victory Day parade in May 2023, official statement about Tokayev's Victory Day parade visit was published on May 8th, just a few hours before his visit. And the statement emphasized that President is determined to pay tribute to the memory of Kazakh soldiers from 100th and 101st divisions who died during World War II in Tver Oblast. And here the emphasis was made on Kazakh soldiers rather than the parade itself, which was done in order to appease the domestic audience in Kazakhstan. And there is one example of broadcasting tool. For instance, on September 28, 2023, Tokayev met German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Germany and highlighted that Kazakhstan wouldn't help Russia in circumventing the Western sanctions. And the following day, Tokayev made a clarifying comment to a journalist from Kazinform, stating that, and I quote, "Kazakhstan is not anti-Russia, and we strongly maintain comprehensive cooperation with Russia." So this specific statement was done in order to show that Kazakhstan is not tilting towards the West. And I think one of the recent examples can be Kazakhstan's abstention from joining the BRICS, in which Kazakhstan officially stated that it's not a priority for Kazakhstan, and it tries to rely on the UN when it comes to international dialogue. So it can be used as an example of broadcasting. So to sum up, in an attempt to maintain domestic stability and accommodate foreign partners, as well as minimize the risks and maximize the gains under this great uncertainty, Kazakhstan arrived at equidistant diplomacy as a viable option. So far, it has been practicing it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it faces some obstacles, and one of the obstacles can be Russia's use of its leverages. And one great example is Russia's initiative in terms of forging a gas union with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, in which it tried to somehow made these countries dependent on Russia's gas infrastructure. These are hurdles that Kazakhstan faces in conducting equidistant diplomacy, but so far it has been trying to make it work. So thank you for your attention, and I would like to hear your comments and questions on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Aizada. So now let's move to our last the panelist, Dr. Zhusipbek, and he'll be talking on key ideas to understand Central Asian region after 2022. So Almaty, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. For probably I don't follow my presentation because ideas have been changed. Presentation may be useful. Yeah, first I want to stop on how we imagine Central Asia. Generally, Central Asia is imagined as authoritarian region, authoritarian societies, authoritarian governments. Also, in our imagination, Central Asia is a land of camels, deserts, Turkestan Mausoleum, Bukhara, Samarkand. And I'm talking about this because now I'm trying not more academic work, but I'm trying to engage more with NGOs and grassroots organizations in Kazakhstan and in neighboring Kyrgyzstan. Recently, I came back to Almaty from CeMEAS. CeMEAS is Eastern Kazakhstan city. And why this city is important? I came back only 2 days ago, several days ago, because the city was a center of Alashorda government. Alashorda government was one of the democratic state entities in the world, not only in this region, but in the world. It was established in 1917. And in our imagination, as I mentioned, Central Asia is something authoritarian, something very distant from democracy, something very distant from human rights. But there is historical fact. May we change the slide? On this slide, some ideas can be seen. And this government called Alashorda government wasn't only one because Bashkir autonomy and Kokand autonomy, they were established in the same year in 1917. And these three state entities were genuinely democratic and genuinely egalitarian state entities, state institutions established in modern times. In that time, European countries had been hierarchical, had been racist. And that's why these three governments couldn't get recognition as independent states. And the leaders of these governments, the leaders of the state entities were quite pragmatic. They didn't want to stop at being autonomous. They finally wanted to get full independence. But unfortunately, yeah, we know reasons. Bolshevik power crushed them. And my ideas concerning the ideas how to understand Central Asia, Central Asian states in new period are following. First, agency. Second, dignity. Third, decolonization and decoloniality. Agency and dignity are closely interconnected because colonization is about violation of dignity. Violated dignity violates agency. No agency if no dignity. Dignity is about freedom of choice. Dignity about freedom of choosing our own life. It's about self-determination. It's about respecting own rights and respecting the rights of others. And that's why it's very important in our days to reshape our imagination of Central Asia. Central Asia is, I'm repeating myself, I apologize for this. Central Asia is a region where the first democratic and egalitarian states in modern history were established. But we in Central Asia don't know these facts. And who established these states? Jadits. We know in Kazakhstan that our intellectual, non-Bolshevik independent intellectuals were called Alash or Alash intellectuals, but 95% of Alash intellectuals were Jadits. Jadidism was the most successful, comprehensive reformist movement in non-Western world because it was centered on education and on grassroots empowerment. They defended gender equality. They defended equality in opportunities. They defended almost all major principles, all fundamental human rights, which we know today. And in that time, Afghanistan was part of Central Asia because many Jadids who could escape, they escaped in Afghanistan. Very interesting example, leading theologian, Jadids were not all theologians, they were they were diverse. Teachers, journalists, writers, farmers, merchants, and some of them were theologians. And a leading theologian was Musa Bigiyev, who defended gender equality in religious terms and defended something very interesting, which today is also very revolutionary. He defended inclusive religious interpretations. And he received political asylum in Afghanistan, but couldn't get there because of distance. And he could escape in Finland because of personal threat from Lenin. And imagination is very important. Why Central Asian integration failed in 1990s and still in very nascent, in very embryonic condition? Because of Sovietisms. Because after 1990s, Central Asian people couldn't get, they couldn't accomplish de-Sovietization, which began only in recent times. And I think the most important factor was in Kazakhstan was bloody January, and second, the start of full-scale war in Ukraine. And these two phenomena caused very serious demands for decolonization and decoloniality. Please, next slide. I'm jumping from one idea to another idea. One of the key ideas which can explain Central Asia nowadays, it's a frustration and disillusionment with international system, with international political, economic, financial system. If we talk about Kazakhstan specifically, the so-called nuclear club is about hierarchical international system. And just one thing, Ukraine's nuclear weapons could prevent war, could prevent annexation of Donbass, annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass. And quite interestingly, these things began to be discussed in Kazakhstan since 2014. And now, especially Kazakh-speaking public, Kazakh medium NGOs, decolonial NGOs, they are hotly debating this issue. And I think sometimes academia goes behind public opinion. And that's why in last years, I'm trying to engage more NGOs and grassroots movements than academia, because academia is a kind of frozen institution because of own colonialities. And if we analyze this, just one detail, I know because of time limitation, just one sign of a hierarchical international system, excuse me, Budapest Memorandum, it's an international document. And this document is very hypocritical document, and it shows that international law is in reality political law. It's not real law. Law cannot be political, but international law, unfortunately, is political law, and it's about hierarchical international system, which, for example, Jadids in our history, in history of Central Asia, could observe, could see 100 years ago. Just one example: Mustafa Shokha is the head of the president of Turkestan autonomy. Couldn't get visa to attend Paris Peace Conference because he was Central Asian. He wasn't a white person, unfortunately. I'm talking about this now openly. And Mustafa Shokhay was ethnic Kazakh. He was the president of Turkestan autonomy, Turkestan Mukhtariyatı. Now the city in Fergana Valley. And in that time, the people didn't discuss who was Kazakh, while you are Kazakh and the head of Turkestan autonomy. And quite interesting example, the government of Turkestan autonomy was comprised of Kazakhs, Tajiks, Azeris, Uzbeks, and one member of government was a Jewish person, was Jew, and it was revolutionary. Not only in Central Asia, it was a revolutionary thing in all of the world. Next slide, please. Yeah, next. Next. We cannot ignore also economic system. If we talk about dignity, if we talk about agency, if we talk about empowerment, decolonization, we must talk about neoliberal economic system, which is colonial one. And nowadays, for example, Kazakh society is very much frustrated with international economic system, with international labor division, and it also can be reflected in academia. I know time is limited, and concerning the war in Ukraine, just one detail. Why Donbass became the hotbed of separatism? Something which not so much talked about. It's because of a low infrastructural power of the government, and why infrastructural power of government declined because of neoliberal reforms of early 1990s. And the same happened in northern Kazakhstan. Last summer, I visited Petropavlsk region, Kızılzar, and I could see by my own eyes how state's infrastructural power failed the people there. It was because of neoliberal reforms. We came very close to Russian border, 20 kilometers. And it's an elephant in the room, unfortunately now. And okay, please next slide, maybe the last. Perspective for the future. Yeah, we need updated understandings of decoloniality. In Central Asia, for example, we can contribute formally to conceptualize more inclusive perceptions of decoloniality based on accepting universal human dignity. It's not a reactionary perception of decoloniality, which can be observed in some Latin American or African scholars. Also, my final words, Central Asia isn't perfect, but it's still developing and making progress. And we need new imaginations, and these imaginations are not mystical, they are based on real facts. Central Asian people could create own entities, or own state entities, and the progressive intellectuals could change. They began the process of cultural upgrading, and this process must be continued nowadays, and it would be real decolonization. And it's about regaining our agency, regaining Central Asian agency. And it's about our dignity. It's about our dignity, and so it's about our choice. And I think we need this kind of talks, and I think that academia should be more flexible and should be more open to society, and not to be imprisoned in own maybe colonial concepts and theories. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hallam. So thank you very much, dear esteemed panelists, for your insightful, very much important thoughts. Now I want to give the floor for Maryia to have some comments and perhaps questions to the panelists.
Yeah. Thank you very much once again for the invitation, for the pleasure of being here. A short question, we have 10 minutes until the end, so I will use around 4 minutes for my comments, 5 minutes, and then I will leave. Okay,
10 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you. Wonderful. I really enjoyed this panel, and we all saw how intertwined all of the presentations were, from the more general theoretical thoughts about the Central Asian regionalism, and we are in Göttingen, for example, and other universities, we are also questioning ourselves. We try to understand what's going on in the region right now, and all of with the interregional powers and things like that. So, and then we move to the the specific example of Turkey as an interregional, as an extra-regional power, and its role in the regionalism, and then a very more specific issue of Kazakhstan and its positioning here right now. What are the changes, and what is the dynamic, and what are the challenges for Kazakhstan as an example from Central Asia, and also wonderful ideas about the need to rethink our understanding, our approach to decolonization, and again use the empirics of the developments in the region now in order to understand and improve the decolonization approaches and the other studies which are relevant to that. So I think that the best way is now to comment on each of the presentations very briefly and ask questions which struck me when I was listening to the presentations. First, Dr. Zhang, thank you so much. This is such a pity that we cannot ask Professor Tello about Central Asia, because I'm sure that if we come with all of these questions, if we would come with all of these questions to him, the understanding would be perhaps much more clear. And thanks again for the wonderful overview of the essence of his works on regionalism. And it's indeed very challenging to assess the current state, nature, and perspectives of Central Asian regionalism if we use all of these frameworks. They're all interregional players again in this. Is it a decisive one, or is it the complementary one to the current process? So it's my question is it so difficult, is it so hard due to the limited applicability of these often Eurocentric frameworks when we approach Central Asian regionalism, or we are really dealing with something unique here in Central Asia, as for example Galym was telling us this, something unique that indicates we need new adjusted new workable models for Central Asia, and we cannot just take the existing ones and try to understand the current developments in the region. Maybe it's like too theoretical question, but this was the one which really was in my mind when I was listening to your talk. Thank you very much. Okay, yeah. So second question is to Dr. Zhi. Again, it's a very theoretical one because you were speaking a lot about theory, and you showed to us that now during this third phase of the Central Asian regionalism, which was on one of the slides, the regional building component is being added to the state building component, and this is the novum. Basically, this is the novelty at the moment. And then you conclude that that's why this is a good example to showcase that the Central Asian regionalism is a very good way to show how the regionalism in Global South works. And at the same time, you said that it was on one of the slides that the institutional design doesn't work for the Global South regionalism. So my question is, what is just to clarify maybe more theoretically, what's your understanding of the institutional design in this sense? Is it more like the restricted institutions, again, the Eurocentric model, or it is more a broadest theory of the institutional design? For example, if we look into the institutional design literature, there are very clear definitions of the so-called non-Western model. They're not perfect, but definitions of the non-Western models of regionalism, when we don't have the restricted institution, but rather a platform for dialogue, for dissolving this or that questions, but not coming together with interfering into the domestic affairs and so on and so forth. So kind of ASEAN model and things like that. So in a way, this model can work for Global South and Central Asia in particular, or you think that still institutional design is something which doesn't work? It's more like the Global North thing. So thank you. Then the Turkish, the role of the Turkey. There was so many things. There were so many things in your presentation. I really would love to talk to all of the speakers afterwards because I had so many questions. But maybe two short questions because due to the constraints of time. First, about this pragmatic approach of Turkey. You spoke about the Turkish world, economics, and infrastructural developments. And then, of course, Turkish word, you put it at the first one. And you spoke about the common language, culture, and history. And the question for me is, again, maybe you mentioned this EU prejudice and the different views on what's going on now, but how to overcome this challenge with this Turkic world, which basically underlying this idea is underlying the whole cooperation between Turkey and Central Asia. How to overcome this challenge of the Kardeş-Adey and Kardeş-Kardeş relations, like brother-brother or older brother and younger brothers. Because when I was speaking to my colleagues from Turkey on to other IR schools, they're not, it's not clear what's the answer, so maybe you have the answer. And the second is, at the very, in your conclusion, we spoke about the bridge, about the Central Asia as a bridge between West and East, between EU and Turkey coming together to help Central Asia to develop its role as a bridge and things like that. So again, we're coming to this idea of the this is the projection again, bridge. This is the construction being done from outside. And again, it's a challenge for the Central Asian identity because it creates the identity of in-betweenness, being in between powers, in between interested players. So how to overcome this challenge with this? For example, Galym again was speaking about regaining dignity. So how does this come together? So these are the two main questions for me. Aizada, thank you so much. So exciting about Kazakhstan. Indeed, critical junction moment for Kazakhstan for the whole Central Asia is February 2022, and afterwards summer 2022, and the things which took place later. And you speak about the equidistant diplomacy, and we know that this is more, it's rather a diplomatic tactics, right? It's about how to navigate in the ongoing process, but it's less about the state strategy. And you asked the question initially in your research about how does the war affected foreign policy. So my question is, what about the state strategy of Kazakhstan in this case? Maybe there were not any change, any huge changes in it, and we are just dealing with the tactics, but no change on the strategic level, or there are some developments, and if you could please expand on this. And finally, Galym, yes, a lot of things again to think about. Also wonderful about the jihadism examples. I think I will make it challenging. You mentioned this engagement with the NGOs, and the development center, the Central Asia is being developing, is making progress. What have you learned from your field experience? How does it really work? Did you see progress, and what are the challenges, if we have time to speak about those? So thank you, all of the esteemed speakers, for your wonderful presentation.
So dear Maryia, thanks a lot for all wonderful questions. So maybe each panelist will take 2 minutes to answer for the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Maryia. I think that it's a very relevant question about to what extent the Maryia Tello's framework on regionalism can be used as an analytical framework for understanding Central Asia. I remember Maryia said to me that the EU's model of regionalism can only serve as a reference. It cannot be imposed. So I think that after new regionalism, Maryia Tello started to talk about comparative regionalism. I think his major contribution is more on new regionalism, but he doesn't really study Central Asia. So for him, Central Asia is completely new. He hasn't been able to live up to this. So I will be very happy to continue to use Maryia Tello's regionalism, new regionalism as my inspirations to know Central Asia. But I think Maryia always tell me to be critical and critique the existing literature. So I think this is something in the future I want to explore. Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. I think regional institution exam is very different from Western countries and group thought in my view, EU's institution design is supranational and global south regional is based on intergovernment institutions. So I think there are two kinds of regional institution design. So if we study Central Asia regionalism, I think at this moment, Central Asia Leader Summit is a forum, not any institution building. So maybe I think Central Asia's regionalism is similar to ASEAN. It's based on intergovernmental institution and pay more attention on regional identity and movements, not institution. And I think this is the future of the Asia region at my view. Thank you.
I will start with the first question. Turkey is acting as an older brother. It's actually what I mentioned in presentation. Was exactly in 90s. Why optimism is actually promoting itself as a model. But Turkey saw this understanding cannot be. So I mentioned new regionalist approach. So institutionalized approach is crucial for not acting as an older brother, for example. For example, Minister of Transportation meetings or different ministerial meetings have been conducted under the OTS. So all the countries has a voice there and their agenda they can bring forward. So institutionalized approach is important to overcome that. And the other is projection question. I think it's about the agency structure issue in IR, I think. For example, I totally agree what Dr. Zhusipbek talked about. Central Asia is how must perceive itself. And but in IR, we often see that mentioning about major powers in Central Asia, etc. And this stems from economic capability, of course. And to bring Central Asia's agency to the fore in the international area, we must firstly bring forward the capabilities, so establish the capabilities of the building structure for that. So economic cooperations, infrastructure, and other potential collaborations in economy is so important to bring forward that identity back. Thank you.
Thank you, Maryia, for your question. Actually, it's a great question. I also asked myself, is there a real change happening in Kazakhstan's foreign policy since February 2022? And first, quick look at Kazakhstan's foreign behavior might suggest that there's no big change because Kazakhstan has been practicing multi-vector foreign policy since the 1990s. However, if in terms of a big state strategy, actually Kazakhstan is following hedging strategy. And it's not a new thing because Kazakhstan previously, prior to 2022, has been resorting to hedging strategy, especially in its dealings with Russia and China in the context of Eurasian Economic Union and Belt and Road Initiative. And by hedging here, I mean this deliberate ambiguity in dealing with various regional actors. And it lies somewhere between balancing and bandwagoning, somewhere in the middle, according to the literature.
But what happened since February 2022 is that Kazakhstan has been relying on hedging strategy, but now hedging strategy is on steroids. It is much more pronounced now, and equidistant diplomacy is just part of it, the tactic, the smaller approach. So both of them have been used previously, but now more actively and more often. And we can say that this new geopolitical setting that was forged after the beginning of 2022 created this testing ground for Kazakhstan's multi-vector foreign policy. And now, again, unlike in the previous times, Kazakhstan's maybe reliance on this policy has become much more pronounced, and it uses it much more actively than it used to. Thank you.
Yes, Maria, thank you for your question and comments. It was really interesting for me to join grassroots organizations, NGOs, and to participate in their activities. Just two examples. Mana project is doing something very interesting. Before giving examples, just a short note about academia. In academia, we are more descriptive. We are trying to understand and we are trying to describe, but not to coin and not to create concepts. Concepts are produced maybe somewhere in Harvard, maybe, and we are considering ourselves not competent, not sufficient to produce and to coin concepts. And that's why academia many times, as I mentioned, goes behind many processes, just trying to describe, and that's all. And two examples. Mana project is very interesting initiative launched by Impact Hub Almaty and some other groups. They gathered people from all Central Asian from all Central Asian states, including Turkmenistan, which is very difficult nowadays. And they organized offline residency in Almaty, and it was something very interesting. I joined in the beginning, and in the end, it was 1 week long residency. People from all Central Asian countries, dozens of people from different backgrounds. Some were even professors, but majority were artists and journalists, people who create content, visual or written content. And they, in 1 week, they claimed that we became one body. And it's not only about Central Asian, so-called classical Central Asian people. It's a very important detail. Central Asian people are not only so-called native Central Asian people. It's also about Germans, Koreans, Russians. And imagination of Central Asia is not only steppes, mountains, desert. It's also pine trees, birch. It's also Siberia. It's northern Kazakhstan. It's also part of Central Asia. And these people who came together for 1 week, before they joined online several times, they even produced Central Asian Manifesto. Something very interesting, and I could observe visually in person. And second example, Erkin Adamlar's Kazakh grassroots. Now it became now foundation. It organized civic, human rights summer schools around Kazakhstan in all parts of Kazakhstan. And when I joined them in northern Kazakhstan, half of the audience was Russians, local Russians. When they went to Turkestan and Shymkent, especially Turkestan is a place where significant Uzbek speaking group of people resides there, maybe 40%. And this group tries to translate the idea. We are Kazakhstanis, we are Central Asian, and we are not divided along ethnic lines. Uzbeks, welcome. It's our own school. Let's learn human rights together. And it was something very important. It was at the grassroots level, and people are trying to translate the ideas. We are living here. We are becoming. We are regaining our agency, and it's about learning our rights. And let's do together. We are not divided, and it's something in the process. Maybe academia in one day tries to describe again, But something in process, and that's why grassroots in this kind of NGOs, also it's about some bloggers that are trying to produce very positive content, uniting, for example, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Fikrat website, also YouTube channel in Uzbekistan, have been producing for 3 years very serious content about Kazakh history. It's something very unexpected, because even our historians nowadays, academia in history making, in history writing, academia is still divided. And yeah, I think regionalism, any discussion about regionalism should now consider this kind of activities. It's a grassroots level. It's between groups. They are more close to each other because they trade with each other. They intermarry. They intermarry. They visit each other. But academia, unfortunately, follows behind all of these things. Yeah. But just positive note, in Central Asia, all of these activities can show that people are really awakened. Yeah, I want to stop with this positive note, and this process is unstoppable. I think. I hope that it's unstoppable. It's a very tectonic change. It's unstoppable process. No one can stop this process of awakening to own agency and reclaiming own dignity.
Okay, thank you, dear panelists, for your answers. And let me now open the floor for the Q&A session. Very few questions, maybe 2, 3 from the audiences. So if anybody wants to ask questions from our panelists. Yes.
The first question is to Professor Zhang. You said in your presentation that European Union is more of a civic rather than trade or power or union. And you are advocating it should move from a civic to trade and power. Do you see that trend in its manifesto in the beginning? Is it like a civil group, or it has these elements of trade and power?
I think that the EU is now moving a little bit from a civilian power to be more, on the one hand, a military power, because they need to have army. At the same time, the EU is moving towards something called the geopolitical power. So now in Brussels, very few people are still talking about civilian power. Because civilian power is looks like very weak, right? Especially in a very difficult geopolitical situation. But when I was there 20 years ago, civilian power is a buzzword. And now EU is moved from civilian power more to military power, geopolitical power. But people still talk about normative power, but no longer fashionable nowadays. More fashionable is geopolitical European Union because of the global context.
Thank you. More questions? Yeah, maybe I have one.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your question. Using leverage, yeah, every country might have certain leverages, but again, as it is present in IR theory, there are great powers, there are small countries, middle powers, and depending on their standing, maybe the quantity or the effect of the leverages also vary. Some countries also are blessed with certain endowments in terms of resources which can be used as leverages, and some countries are maybe punished. So it depends on so many factors. There are also historical factors, and it looks like leverages depend mostly on what status they used to have in the past, and so nowadays leverages usually are in the hands of bigger countries, bigger powers. And even though smaller powers have leverages, sometimes they are constrained to use them. So my observation, they try to use certain leverages when they can, when they can allow it, but sometimes they cannot. So it's very contingent upon the context and the maybe regional geopolitical situation. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, dear panelists, for a very much thoughtful and interesting session. So again, like from the new regionalism, comparative regionalism, it's always good to learn from other regions, right? But at the same time, we also have learned that we also have prior values, right? Prior facts that united Central Asian, all Central Asian countries. So when it's not only kind of exported from somewhere else, but when we have kind of roots inside, like among Central Asian countries, I think the seeds would actually be helpful to create so-called new Central Asian regionalism that will also enable not only economic, political, geopolitical kind of aspects, also the which also enable perhaps for the people-to-people connections, right? The culture-to-culture connections. And with this note, I'd like to stop. Thank you very much for coming, taking the part. Thanks a lot for the guests, for the panelist members, for our discussants, Maryia. And now we're gonna stop and we move